It finally happened today. Special counsel David Weiss, who's overseeing the Hunter Biden investigation, sat down with the House Judiciary Committee led by Jim Jordan to finally answer questions about the investigation, the DOJ role, possible bias. But he clearly did not give some of the far-right members what they wanted. It was an unprecedented move. Weiss sat down today for a closed-door meeting, and while he made it clear he would not get into the details of his investigation, he was willing to answer questions about the process, in particular his relationship with the DOJ. He testified that, quote, "I am and have been the decision maker on this case. At no time was I blocked or otherwise prevented from pursuing charges or taking the steps necessary in the investigation by other United States attorneys, the tax division, or anyone else at the Department of Justice." It's pretty straightforward. Weiss also stressed that he did not request special counsel status until August 2023. When I made that request, it was promptly granted, which is why Democrats on the committee were crowing after today's meeting.
A total waste of time. I mean, once again, we see Jim Jordan and his MAGA crew out there trying to weaponize the Judiciary Committee in order to have a desperate search for some political dirt.
It's been repetitive, quite repetitive. And as I said, a total waste of time because I think Weiss has stated publicly that he was completely free to make his own charging decisions. And he simply said it again and again and again today.
Those on the far right clearly frustrated, not claiming that Weiss was lying, just reiterating that he would not answer many of the very questions he'd warned them that he could not and would not answer.
Mr. Weiss was here incarnate, but not particularly in spirit. Anytime we had any question about any communication regarding the Department of Justice or Mr. Graves, he would demur and say that it was just part of his deliberative process. Well, the reason Congress has questions is because that deliberative process has resulted in some pretty bizarre outcomes that we can't explain to our constituents. And we think that Mr. Weiss has been pretty evasive.
Weiss now dismissively referred to as part of the Biden Department of Justice, even though he was specifically held over from the Trump administration, and now granted the independence of special counsel status, as was John Durham, which I'll talk about in a moment, so he can conduct his own investigation, which of course seems is not good enough for those who don't actually want a legal proceeding against Hunter Biden. They want a political cudgel to try to use against Joe Biden. David Weiss is now also, by the way, a grand villain to Hunter Biden's lawyers who are accusing him of improperly backing out of that plea deal and of caving to political pressure from the right.
If the now special counsel decides not to go by the deal, then it will mean that he or they decided that something other than the facts and the law are coming into play.
The more radical political figures on the right began to sour on Weiss after some investigators leaked that they believed there was enough evidence to charge Hunter Biden in October of 2022. When the Washington Post reported that federal agents investigating President Biden's son Hunter have gathered what they believe is sufficient evidence to charge him with tax crimes and a false statement related to a gun purchase, according to people familiar with the case. Now, after that article came out, there was a meeting the next day, and this is where the IRS whistleblowers come in, that Gary Shapley, a supervisory agent, and Joseph Ziegler, an IRS special agent, testified that led them to believe the Justice Department slow-walked and meddled in the investigations into Hunter. According to Shapley, David Weiss had said in that October meeting last year that he would not be the deciding official regarding whether to prosecute Hunter Biden. This despite Attorney General Merrick Garland's assurances that Weiss had total autonomy, and Weiss confirming that again today. The whistleblowers testified that they had heard that Biden-appointed U.S. attorneys in California and Washington blocked Weiss from prosecuting Hunter on felony tax charges in those jurisdictions. And Shapley claimed that Weiss said he was initially turned down when he tried to get the broader special counsel status months ago after being told by the local prosecutors that they would not bring charges.
It appeared to me, based on what I experienced, that the U.S. attorney in Delaware in our investigation was constantly hamstrung, limited, and marginalized by DOJ officials as well as other U.S. attorneys.
Based on my experience, I'm here to tell you that the Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office and Department of Justice handling the Hunter Biden tax investigation was very different from any other case in my 14 years at the IRS.
Ziegler and Shapley claim the investigation into Hunter was stymied by political bias within the DOJ in favor of Biden. Shapley said prosecutors concealed contents of Hunter Biden's laptop from investigators, delayed the execution of search warrants until after the 2020 election, and didn't allow investigators to follow up on a disputed WhatsApp message between Hunter and a Chinese businessman where he seemingly referenced his father. But of course, there's the inconvenient fact that Donald Trump was president when those decisions were made. But Weiss really became a political target when he contradicted the claims that he wanted to bring additional charges but was stopped by Biden-appointed prosecutors. He wrote on July 10th that, quote, "I have not requested counsel designation. I was assured that I would be granted this authority if it proved necessary, and this assurance came months before the October 7th, 2022 meeting referenced throughout the whistleblower's allegations. In this case, I've never been denied the authority to bring charges in any jurisdiction." He now says he only requested that status in August. He quickly got it. Of course, in any rational world, those who'd been calling for a special counsel would be celebrating that Weiss now has that broader authority and that Merrick Garland granted it to him. In fact, 93 House Republicans and 33 Senate Republicans signed letters last year calling for just this, making Weiss special counsel. I agreed, by the way. Of course, that's not good enough now. They now want to believe that this lifelong Republican, who President Trump described as sharing the president's vision for making America safe again in 2018, is lying. Again, the whistleblowers may have believed that to be the case, but for it to be actually true, Weiss has to be lying and risking a nearly 40-year career to cover for Hunter Biden. And now, by the way, there are whistleblowers on the other side. One 14-year FBI vet prepared a 22-page statement for staffers of the Senate Judiciary Committee accusing the FBI of suppressing efforts to investigate members of former President Trump's team, including Rudy Giuliani. Look, bottom line, it seems different investigators wanted to pursue different things, but they don't get to make the final call. David Weiss even offered to testify publicly in front of Congress and presented up to 4 possible dates for his testimony. House Judiciary Committee Chair Republican Jim Jordan decided to pass on that, and now just wanted today's testimony behind closed doors. We may know why now. Now, remember, Weiss has now charged Hunter Biden for lying on a federal firearms application about his drug use. I have not been able to find another case ever prosecuted for possession of a weapon by a drug user lying on this form where it was A, one gun, B, the defendant had no criminal history, C, there was no other crime committed, D, the gun was not used in a crime, and E, there were no other aggravating factors. By the way, he's still likely to face those tax charges too. But the far right still wants to claim, oh, Weiss is being so soft on Hunter. Now remember John Durham? He was appointed special counsel, kind of near the end of his investigation by Attorney General Barr, similar fashion. Both cases, Barr and Garland, relied on a variety of statutes that permit the Attorney General to authorize a sitting prosecutor broader power. And when the administration kept John Durham on to finish his work, as they did for David Weiss, I don't recall the attacks on Durham as being part of the Biden DOJ. But of course, even Durham ended up being a disappointment to the far right because he didn't give them a clear-cut blueprint for a political attack either. He had concerns, he had critiques of the FBI, as did many other investigations. But despite his questions, even he could not and did not point to politics being the cause of the opening of the Russia investigation. It's why people like Matt Gaetz accused Durham of being part of the FBI cover-up. Bottom line, politicized media figures or leaders have anointed David Weiss the latest villain out to harm his own party by risking everything to corrupt the legal process. This as Hunter Biden's lawyers rage from the other side. I know it's not politically satisfying, but maybe, just maybe, Weiss is trying to do his job as fairly as he possibly can. And good for him for being willing to voluntarily head to the congressional lion's den and emerge without any bites.